I'm already qualified, but I want to be number one. That's what I want to be, and right now he is number one. And, we've talked a lot about Joe this weekend and the race between him and Alex and, our fantastic top 8 of our Invitational with Reed Duke and company. One thing we haven't really talked about is Chris VanMeter and the fact that if he wins this tournament, that beard's probably gone. That was a big thing during season 2.
He got his qualification to the Players' Championship, but you're right, he never won that tournament that he was looking for.
Yes. So this could still be a thing here for Chris, as he does just play a Temple of Abandon, and now will be attacked for 2 by Soldier of the Pantheon. He's down to 18. Metcalf has a Forest, and he's curving out, as his deck is known to do. There's Voice of Resurgence.
So here's one of the dangerous parts, I think, in the matchup. Giant Monsters doesn't have any cards that cost 1. So just his ability to interact here is pretty limited. So first of all, he has a bunch of tap lands. Sorry, when I say nothing that costs 1, okay, no, of course he played Elvish Mystic. I think cards that interact, so like there's no 1-mana kill spell.
Sure.
Like he can only deploy cards so quickly, and he's really limited by the cost of his cards and the fact that his lands are tapped. So if Metcalf is just playing, 1, 2 things a turn in the early game, there aren't many ways, even if Chris got to choose his draws, that he could stop this from happening.
It's an Ajani. It's going to pump with the Soldier of the Pantheon. This will be an attack for 5. Chris, of course, with no good block, so he just has to take the damage yet again.
Yeah. A turn 2 ramp spell is not a bad start for Giant Monsters, but you see right now, you almost feel like he is, he's 2 turns from dead.
Yeah, it doesn't take much for this green-white deck to get the game over with very quickly. Of course, Ajani's minus effect giving flying and double strike can close the game out very quickly, as we have seen with green-white over the past couple of weeks here. This is a Mutavault. That is a Goblin Rabble Master. And there's another copy of Elvish Mystic. The Goblin token will come into play, and you have to imagine that's going to go after Ajani to try to slow that thing down.
And this is pretty good. Chris has now cast 3 spells, so he's on par with Metcalf. 2 of his spells are Elvish Mystic, so his cards are a little bit worse, but he's staying close enough on parity where he could get this game.
He's got to make some exchanges here early and often to try to keep up, but it might be working his way towards rather large Museum Mortars. Chris does have 2 of those in his deck. He only does have 2 sources of red mana. Gonna have to try to find that 3rd one, but he's got 5 mana right now. If the 6th one is an untapped red source, might be able to catch him back up in this game, as Metcalf's going to take a look at his hand. He's got another Ajani of Forest there, and it looks like 2 copies of Selesnya Charm.
And there's some danger here, to be sure. We saw last time a little bit of a flood out on the side of David Malafarina. He hit up to 9 lands, but when this green-white aggro deck gets the right composition of lands and spells, it's hard for John to interact. You see, with 2 Selesnya Charms and Ajani, he could just start basically valuing his Ajani to have a creature fly over, deal 6. Next turn, if he were to draw a white source, he could just Selesnya Charm a guy, play another Ajani, fly over, and kill.
And Metcalf is going to go deep in the tank here again with those options. Those are some pretty good ones. Wants to try to mask the fact that he has multiple Selesnya Charms. Hopefully run VanMeter into a bit of a trap. He's going to take a look at the Rabble Master and make sure he knows exactly how that does work. In this situation for Scott, it's just kind of a boring old 2-2.
Now remember, Metcalf cannot Selesnya Charm his Soldier of the Pantheon here in combat. It has protection from all multicolored spells. So if he wants to use it as a combat trick to trample over, he has to use it on the smaller creature of the 2, which makes 2-2 and trample a little less powerful.
And deciding how to use Ajani in this spot as well, a little bit difficult. And in this particular tournament from Scott, I may just make the Soldier into a 4-3 and then get in there with both of my creatures, but he also may have some interest in just saying, hey, flying and double strike, give my creature +2/+2 and hit you really, really hard.
Yeah, if there's some temptation to plus it here, he can make some pretty rough attacks with a plus, or he can just go for the throat. It's going to flying and double strike the voice, and I think he's choosing that option. I'm going to see it. I think if he's giving Voice of Resurgence stop flying and double strike, he's going to pump it also.
Yeah, and he can actually just pump it twice if he wants to.
Yeah, he could pump it twice. That would only put Chris to 1, not to 0. So he's going to play a land, and now he's baiting Chris into making the wrong block. If Chris does not block Soldier of the Pantheon here, he is dead.
It's a little ugly.
Yeah, now the chump block of Elvish Mystic on Soldier is, I think, pretty free here.
I like this block too, of just,
right.
Rabble Master's going to trade here because he can't Selesnya Charm it. So you win that, you win that minor war. And I hope for Scott's sake he doesn't think that he can Selesnya Charm that, because then things get a little bit dicey. We'll see what ends up happening here.
He may just put Chris to 1 with a voice in play and an extra Ajani in hand, putting his opponent to 1 is not too shabby.
It's relatively safe unless the Storm Breath Dragon does show up. There's +2/+2.
All right. There's
+2/+2.
All right.
Yep.
So that's a 6/6 flying double strike. Chris goes to 1. The trade happens there. And here's the thing, if Chris does not have a flyer or an instant speed removal spell, he's going to be dead next turn.
That backup of Johnny is looking mighty tough as Chris is going to draw a card here.
Johnny gives green-white aggro reach in so many matches and so many board states where no other card would win it for them.
Chris did draw his other red source there. It was a copy of Blood Crypt, but he is at 1 life, so he can't play that untapped. And of course, the game has changed quite a bit at this point, where overloading Elysium Mortars isn't even important at this point. The most important card here for Chris is actually a copy of Storm Breath Dragon. If he has one of those, he can actually defend the air.
He's from the air. If he has 2 kill spells, he's fine also. He could just actually kill both halves of voice.
Yep, and there is the dragon. Chris, very smart. Not, playing that attacking, leaving that back on defense. The draw this turn for Scott was a copy of Banishing Light.
How annoying is protection from white?
Yeah, it almost seems like it's kind of tacked on there, but it's actually not. VanMeter is going to untap. Take a draw here, as all Metcalf can do is just pass the turn back. You saw him not cast the Ajani, probably on purpose. Again, wants to leave that as a bit of a surprise.
Chris is pretty savvy here. I'd be surprised if the Storm Breath Dragon attacks, especially when Chris has a Rabble Master in hand. The danger for Chris is that Advent of the Worm at any point here out of Metcalf is very possibly lethal.
Yeah, and if I'm Chris, I'm not even, playing around that card really. Not a lot that he can really do about it, truth be told. In a perfect world, for Chris, he could play around everything. But I think Advent of the Worm is one of those cards that you did mention that he can't even try to play around. It's like, if you have it, well, I'm dead, and that sucks.
So your Storm Breath Dragon holding down the fort against the Voice of Resurgence. Chris is at 1.
The thing about Storm Breath, too, is that he can actually, if the game lines up in an appropriate way, he can kill Metcalf pretty quickly with it.
Yeah, Storm Breath is really good at transitioning from defense to offense very quickly.
But again, it does, he's got to hold the fort down a little bit here. He's going to play the Rabble Master pre-combat and get in here with 2 Goblin tokens. We'll see Voice block one of them. So Metcalf's going to take 1 from that. He's going to go down to 17. VanMeter will play a Stomping Ground tapped and kick it back.
Draw was Call of the Conclave for Scott Metcalf. Just could use more creatures. You may see him, I don't know, he may Banishing Light a Rabble Master here. It's taking away Chris's clock.
Yep.
Is important, because right now Chris can't attack with the dragon. So he wants to take away all the cards that Chris can reasonably attack with, but with that, buying himself more turns is probably the best thing that Metcalf could do.
Rabble Master causing a bit of an issue. You see the Elysium Mortars. Here's a Temple of Abandon, so a little scry action here for VanMeter. He'll take a look. And he likes what he sees.
Chris is setting up here for an end-of-turn Monstrosity activation on Storm Breath Dragon. That'll turn it into a 7/7 and deal 2 damage. So it's not a lethal swing back, but it would be a 2-turn clock if Chris decides to swing it. It's getting closer to making that transition that he wants.
The big thing here is if Chris ever shifts gears and thinks it's appropriate to attack with the Storm Breath Dragon, he dies immediately.
Right.
He's been right so far. But will he feel it's appropriate to shift gears? Because, again, Scott has done such a great job of just holding this to Johnny the entire time. No reason to put that on the table and give Chris that information. Use it as a surprise attack and a surprise way to win.
Yeah, last card in Chris's hand is Elysium Mortars. Chris deciding, does he need to cast this? Is there a reason to cast it? Just things, when you're at 1, the size of your opponent's creature doesn't particularly matter. If he were to cast this Elysium Mortars, he could start attacking with some Elvish Mystics if he wanted.
That's true. Quick update for you guys in our backup match. Jarvis Yu with Black-Green Devotion. Small splash of green in there. He's up a game over Peter Rep playing a mono Black Devotion. As we will see the Mortars take down the Voice of Resurgence. Trigger, of course, will make an Elemental token, but that Elemental token is a 1/1. As you mentioned, that means he can get in there with those little guys.
Yeah, and I was wondering just how many of them he wanted to swing, and the answer is a lot.
Yeah. But more importantly, Storm Breath Dragon is still not attacking.
Yeah, well, I think what he wants to do is he's trying to set up a situation where he can say end step, Monstrosity, Stormbreath Dragon, untap, swing it, and kill you. And by putting Scott to Metcalf to 12, he's close to that spot.
Another Banishing Light was the draw for Metcalf. He still got that Ajani. He still has that Call of the Conclave here, but Chris is beginning to turn the corner. And let's not forget, Matthias, he did keep his card on top with that Temple of Abandon. So you have to imagine that's going to be a pretty nice one, too. Don't know what it is, of course, but he was happy to keep it, and he kept it pretty quickly.
Right. Scott with not very many turns. Here we see Call, Ajani, Banishing Light. He did such great work in putting Chris to 1, but it looks like he may fall short.
The green-white deck, no reach. One of the few problems. You know, its reach, again, is Ajani, and Ajani did a great job at the beginning of this game, and it has potential to do a great job at ending this game. But that would have to be a misstep from VanMeter to cause that, as there is a Call of the Conclave, so there is a Centaur token. Voice of Resurgence now a 2/2. VanMeter's going to untap. I want to know what this card is. Let's see what he kept.
All right, and we will see.
Looks like a red card. I mean, it may be Mortars and maybe another Dragon.
Yeah, I mean, either would be very good, a second Mortars or a Dragon. Remember, all Chris needs to do is stay alive for one more turn. He needs to just Monstrosity that Dragon and then swing it.
Shredding very carefully. He has to here. Again, one misstep, one slight error, and this game goes to Metcalf. Ah, okay, it's a copy of Pelucranos.
Yeah, Pelucranos is pretty good. And maybe one of the ways he loses here is with Celestia Charm trampling through. There are a lot of things that could do that. Pelucranos is a pretty good insurance policy on that sort of thing.
The only issue I think here for Pelucranos is the inability to Monstrosity for, for 2. You can only Monstrosity for 1 in this situation. So that might be a bit of a problem here. But by and large, not too bad. You can't be unhappy drawing the World Eater in this situation. It's better than nothing. That's why I imagine he kept it on top. No attacks here, though, as Metcalf will draw.
He actually had to decide between casting Pelucranos and just activating Stormbreath Dragon on that turn. And that was actually a pretty close call for him. There's advantages to both of them.
Let's not forget, this entire game, Chris is playing around the card right now, Ajani. That's the only card that he really cares about, the Caller of the Pride. If he wasn't playing around it, he'd be attacking with the Dragon, of course.
And that card is in Metcalf's hand. Chris is correctly playing around the card.
Temple of Plenty here, the Scry for Scott. We'll see where he puts this card. Looks like he's going to put it to the bottom.
Right.
3 mana, big bad Banishing Light.
Yep, that was the second Banishing Light. He's been able to remove everything that isn't Stormbreath Dragon. That protection from white still getting him. But Metcalf has again created a board that Chris is a little hesitant to attack on. Gives Metcalf more chances to draw out of this. If Metcalf can draw land, second Ajani in his next 2 draws, that would get it.
Hey, in that last turn, Metcalf had the ability to just play Ajani and give his Centaur double striking flying into the Stormbreath Dragon, and the Stormbreath Dragon would have traded with the Centaur. Again, I don't know how much that accomplishes, because then the Voice of Resurgence Elemental token is a 1/1. Pelucranos could shoot that down, and then Pelucranos could start attacking. So,
right, it was close, and I think you're right. The Pelucranos stops him from being able to do that.
So VanMeter's draw, we don't have a great look at. Looks like it is a spell, though.
What he could do is, if he gets enough time, he could play Ajani, plus it, targeting the Centaur token, and then next turn, if he somehow can keep the Ajani alive, can flying and double strike the Centaur token, and it could just eat Stormbreath Dragon.
There's a Satyr token. Back to Metcalf we go. We'll see what he draws. It's a copy of Soldier of the Pantheon. He will deploy that.
An excellent Satyr blocker.
VanMeter will draw.
But eventually this Dragon's going to go 7/7.
Yeah, I mean, the big question is, when is Chris able to finally move in with the Dragon? When is it appropriate? That's the thing he's got to try to figure out. Another Satyr is definitely a fine start, if that's what he wants to do. I mean, the elevator can certainly go up on Xenagos, and Chris could be thinking, well, man, I can do a lot of sweet stuff with this. And his draw for the turn was actually a copy of Domri. So now we're getting really interesting.
Well, the best part about the Domri draw is that it's not just to get some more cards, is that it's removal here. One of the safest ways for him to win this game is to simply start killing his opponent's things. And we actually saw that last time when he played against green-white aggro. Chris was almost every time Domri had more than 2 counters on it, Chris was choosing to fight in this matchup. He wasn't getting extra cards. He was just using it as a double fight card.
You see Chris fight the Centaur with the Dragon. Now he's going to fire Bermuda Vault and get in the red zone. He felt that fight was pretty safe. Not going to play around the 3rd Celestia Charm in that instance.
Sure. If he didn't feel it was safe, he could have fought the Elemental token because it's white.
Always wins that fight, of course. The draw was a copy of Voice of Resurgence here for Scott. Things are starting to shift VanMeter's direction in this game.
Yeah, 2 Planeswalkers in play gives VanMeter a lot more virtual card advantage.
He will quickly tick up Domri. That's a copy of Sylvan Caryatid. That one doesn't matter a ton. But VanMeter trying to hang on here at 1 life. He's doing a pretty darn good job of it. Overgrown Tomb was the draw for the turn.
Yeah, so he's going to play Sylvan Caryatid. Because of all this card advantage he has in terms of Satyrs and Domri activations, he can just play this game at his own pace if he really wants to. And I don't think we'll see him get aggressive until it's just lethal.
Activates Monstrosity on the Dragon. I'm with you. I still don't think, I mean, it's easy to say, hey, well, he shouldn't attack, duh. But I still don't think he's going to attack. I think that this entire game he's just saying, look, I'm not losing to a Johnny. Under no circumstance am I losing to that card. I'm protected around it perfectly. It's just another Call of the Conclave.
Well, green, so there's some decks here in Standard that as you play more creatures, each creature gets, like, that there's an exponential progression in how good they get. You know, the Nykthos decks would be a great example of this, or like Mono Blue Devotion, Mono Blue Aggro. As you play more creatures, each creature you control gets better. Green-white is not this exponential deck, it's a linear deck, so each time you draw another creature, it is just another 3/3, which is roughly 1 3/3 better than where you were before. Because of that, you can let green-white aggro continue to just draw more creatures, and it's fairly safe. You know, if your wall protects you now, your wall will probably continue to protect you in the future. And because of that, Chris never needs to go on offense. Once he has Planeswalkers, he can just play draw-go indefinitely with the green-white aggro deck because every turn that passes, the wall that Chris has put up will just get stronger.
Advent of the Worm was the draw, finally. Right, we'll see if that changes things.
It's one of the cards that's pretty good here, but Chris, like I said, he doesn't ever have to attack until it's just plain lethal. I wouldn't be surprised to not see him attack until he has a second Storm Breath, and then just say, okay, well, 11 you in the air.
Now that draw was a pretty good one there in Scavenging Ooze. My question, of course, is how many creatures are in the graveyard? There are actually not a ton on the green-white side, only 2.
Yeah, well, a lot of their creatures are actually instants and sorceries. As we saw there, was it 2 Celestia Charms and a Call of the Conclave in the yard?
So he's going to gain 2 life, make it 3. He's going to go up to 4. And Advent of the Worm plus Double Strike. Let's see, so 5, 10. So of course, Advent of the Worm, you know, becomes a 5/5 Double Striker. There's the Worm token. You make it flying and Double Strike with the Johnny. Stormbright Dragon gets in the way. 5 damage is dealt, and then 3 will come through, which will knock VanMeter down to 1.
If he didn't have 3 creatures to eat that turn.
Yeah.
If he only had 2. This would be a lethal attack.
It's kind of crazy, actually.
How unfortunate for Scott Metcalf.
Ooze showed up at just the right time. I will say that.
What he can do is he can plus and put a counter on the Worm and then try to defend a Johnny, and he won't succeed in defending a Johnny. Chris has far too many creatures, but he could force Chris into making an attack that removes enough blockers that Metcalf could swing back for lethal.
Yeah, I mean, the problem there, right, is just like Stormbright Dragon just eats the Ajani, so what are you really accomplishing at that point unless you draw another Ajani?
Right, you're still on, now you're on a double Ajani out.
Yeah. And it looks like he's finally going to cast Ajani here. And I'm okay with this, you know, if your plan is to just double strike the Worm token. Yeah, it looks like that's what he's going to do. And this trades, of course, with the Storm Breath Dragon. You get a little bit of damage across as well.
Yeah, 10 power in the air here, trampling. So the only play Chris has is to put Storm Breath Dragon. Chris confirms, oh, that's at me. Okay.
Yeah, not Xenagos, not Domri, okay.
Oh, block. Chris, just as soon as he gains 3, he goes back, takes 3, he goes back to 1.
Yeah. Easiest way to look at that is 10 minus 7. 7 toughness on the dragon, 10 power from the advent of the worm. Now Ooze will get to eat the dragon, push himself up to 2. And Ooze is becoming quite the threat at this point.
Yeah, draw, no help there for VanMeter with another Xenagos. He is thinking about ultimating his first Xenagos.
Yeah, we'll take a look at Xenagos to see exactly how the ultimate does work, because this is an SCG Live first for me. I don't know if it is for you, but this is the first for me.
I don't believe I've seen one. He exiles the top 7 cards and he gets all the creatures and lands. And he can play more. He can break the 1 land per turn battle restriction, because it doesn't say you may play them. It says you may put them onto the battlefield.
Okay.
It's kind of like Genesis Wave that way.
It's a real party.
Yeah, well, Xenagos is all about the party.
Yeah.
He's about the revel.
They're having the time of his life. And actually, you see Chris actually he revealed 2 Pelucranos, and he put 1 in play, and he almost said, I'm not going to do the other one. And then he said, actually, I will, because then the legendary rule is going to kill one of them, which puts a creature in the graveyard for scavenging use, and that point of life might actually be very important.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't play something off it, it just stays in exile permanently. So that second Pelucranos is gone anyway. It's not like it's shuffling back in.
Chris is going to tick up, see what he finds. Doesn't miss. However, the backup Xenagos that he drew for the turn is also mighty interesting as well. You thought that Reed Duke and his green-red devotion deck was the only one that could generate this much mana. But now he's able to generate a very large Pelucranos activation to start clearing some of these creatures off the table, work his way maybe towards that Ajani, and work his way towards a win.
Well, if he plays Xenagos here, a plus on Xenagos makes 3, 6, 9 mana. So playing Xenagos actually just nets him 5 mana. So he would get 9, he would have 5 mana left over. He does have 14 to spend on Pelucranos if he wants to.
Yeah, not bad.
No, and actually it's 17 if you count, if he wants to use tap some mana creatures. So he could monsters it for as much as 8, which is enough to kill all of Scott's creatures.
He'll leave a couple of copies of Voice of Resurgence, or the elemental tokens from Voice behind, but those may be beatable. May not be that big of a deal.
Yeah, so he pluses for 9 mana, taps 4 more for 13. That is enough for X equals 6. 6 is the minimum he needs to kill everything. He can go 2 to the 2 voices, 1 to the soldier, and 1 to the token. Even though the token's a 4/4, he'll get 1 damage on it, and when both those voices die with a trigger on the stack, which we are right now, see the elemental's a 1/1 at this split second. So the elemental dies. Scott is left with a pair of 2/2s.
And now Chris can actually party on in with some of these creatures.
Yeah, and the part I really like about this line is that Chris has left up 4 green mana sources and just killed 3 creatures and milled a Pelucranos, so he can gain 4 life if he needs to, puts him to 6, and it's really unlikely that Scott has a way to deal 6 in his deck with only these pair of 2/2s in play.
This is one heck of a comeback. If Chris is able to finish off this game, this is one heck of a comeback. The Ooze was timely. The no attacks on Storm Breath Dragon the entire time. I'm sure it was enticing at some points to say, well, maybe you don't have it, Johnny. Let me try to kill you, which he would have been wrong about the entire time. So this has been one heck of a game here for VanMeter. Metcalf has been, for his part, playing this game very well, I believe, the entire time, too, hoping that Chris makes a mistake so that he can snipe him with the Ajani, but he hasn't been able to do that.
The big decision for Metcalf was that turn where he double Celestia Charm to put Chris to 1. And I liked the play at the time, but Metcalf was aware that 1 is not 0, that he would have to find a way to sneak 1 final point through, and he just wasn't able to do it. Chris had to have Storm Breath Dragon, but Storm Breath Dragon was the card he had, and you see VanMeter up a game now.
A bit of a smile there on Chris's face. When you win a game like that, where you're at 1 for numerous turns and you can't make a mistake, I'd be smiling too. He does win game number 1 over Scott Metcalf. Jund Monsters up a game over green-white aggro, as we will come back to the booth before we take a look at the sideboards here, because it is time for our second of 9 Star City Games
There's
premium
so
giveaways.
much premium being given away. We mentioned that before. Remember, this is our top 8 Sunday, so 3 top 8s over the course of the day. Standard, then Invitational, then Legacy.
All right, so do you want to do rules or do you want to do the question? Your
I'll
call.
go ahead and do the question for this one.
All right, rules are pretty simple here. Get your Twitters open, hashtag SCG Premium. Make sure you're following at SCG Live. My good friend Matthias here will ask you guys a question as some level of difficulty, probably not too bad this morning. And you will use that hashtag with the hashtag of SCG Premium. We will announce the winner of our 6-month premium giveaway at the conclusion of our semifinal round. And of course, all giveaways here on SCG Live are at the sole discretion of Star City Games. No giveaways here are affiliated with Twitch.tv, though we do thank them for broadcasting on their fantastic network.
All right, so our question here, we're going to go to this green-white aggro deck that we've seen both Scott Metcalf play and David Malafarina. One of the things I noticed that game was that when Chris VanMeter drew Scavenging Ooze, there actually weren't too many creatures in the graveyards, despite Metcalf playing a creature almost every turn of the game. And that's because there are a lot of green-white non-creature spells that make creature tokens in the green-white deck. And of those ones, I'm looking for the sorcery of the two. He does have both instants and sorceries that makes tokens, but only one that make tokens for green-white. So looking for a green-white sorcery token maker in the green-white aggro deck by Scott Metcalf.
Now, if you can name that green-white sorcery that makes a creature, again, sorcery, not instant, hashtag the answer with the hashtag of SCG Premium. Make sure you're following at SCG Live, and again, we will announce the winner at the conclusion of our semifinal round. As we will head back down to the match, we will take a look at the sideboards, and you'll see that Scott Metcalf has a Reclamation Sage, 4 copies of Skylasher, an additional Banishing Light, 3 Unflinching Courage, 2 Rootborn Defenses, 2 copies of Satessan Tactics, and 2 Tristani, Celestina's Voice. Matthias, what do you like from Scott?
Well, last time in the top 8, we saw Malafarina sideboard, and we were wondering whether he would sideboard a single card in the matchup. And it's Metcalf's board's a little bit better here, but I see the same point. I wonder, so he expects Chris to go on an all-removal spell plan, I would imagine. That's what Chris did last round, and if you're an experienced pilot with green-white, you would expect that out of pretty much any Jund deck. So cards that can be interesting here, I think Banishing Light is great at taking care of Pelucranos, but as you saw, it can have its difficulties. It doesn't take care of Stormbreath Dragon. I'm interested to see whether or not he wants to use a card like Tristani, Celestina's Voice. It's fairly resistant to a lot of Chris's removal, and it can create him card advantage if he ever gets it with a token. There's some downside. It's a 2/5 for 4. That's really not good in the matchup. So it could also be left on the board, but that's the card that's most interesting to me. Other than that, I guess I would see him using the Banishing Light and probably nothing else.
On Chris's side, he has 3 copies of Mistcutter Hydra, 2 Golgari Charm, a Magma Spray, a Putrefy, an Ultimate Price, a Bow of Nylea, a Vraska the Unseen, 2 copies of Flames of the Firebrand, along with 2 Rakdos's Return, and an additional Mizium Mortars. I expect to see the Mortars come in. What else do you like?
Well, we saw him do it last round, and the decks between Metcalf and Malafarina are similar enough that I imagine he'll just do the same board strategy. So last time he brought in Golgari Charms, Magma Sprays, Putrefy, Ultimate Price, and Mizium Mortars. Along with Vraska was brought in as well.
So he's just loading up on removal.
He's just going to kill everything, and that is his best plan. Because as you saw that game, when green-white curves out, even when Jund has its best draw, sometimes it can't keep pace. And so the best thing it can do is just kill things as Metcalf plays them. So I'd say all his removal is coming in. He's got to be especially happy that he has some 1-mana removal in his sideboard, because that'll let him, in theory on turn, he could be playing 2 kill spells as soon as turn 3.
Well, Jarvis, you and Peter Rep are headed to a 3rd and final game. Black Splash Green Devotion for you. Rep playing just Mono Black Devotion. So if we do have time to head that way, we certainly will. But we'll stay with VanMeter and Metcalf here for now. Again, Chris VanMeter does win game number 1 here with Jund Monsters over green-white aggro. Chris was actually able to get by green-white aggro in the quarterfinals as well. He said on Twitter this morning he is not in love with this matchup. I can't imagine that he's happy with this pairing either, but he was able to eke out that first one.
Yeah, and a lot of times, so Jund Monsters has some really good strengths and some really big weaknesses. Its strengths are that it's very hard for a control deck to deal with. Your threats all have annoying protection abilities, haste, some are planeswalkers. Some of them just create card advantage on their own, whether you kill them or not. So that's definitely a strength of the deck. I think one of the strengths of the deck is it has a great sideboard. I think one of the weaknesses of the deck is that its power level can be low. It doesn't have a nut draw. There are games where you play turn 1 on the draw, you play turn 1 Temple, turn 2 Sylvan Caryatid, a very reasonable draw for the deck, and when you untap on turn 3, you just look at the board and you say, oh, I've lost. And we saw that when Tom Ross played the entire top 8 of the Invitational 3 months ago.
Yeah. Metcalf with no turn 1 or turn 2 play. Now, he does have a Selesnya Charm hanging out in the grip, so I believe we'll see a Knight token here in just a little bit. But VanMeter's going to play a Temple of Abandon. Top card's going to go to the bottom, and he's just going to pass the turn back. He is not attacking into that open mana.
I was saying, yeah, no turn 2 play. I remember, Stat will end step this because a lot of Chris's removal is sorcery speed. So he's not a blue deck. He doesn't have to worry about any counter spells.
Now, Scott does have a Giant in play. He also has actually a copy of Unflinching Courage as well, but you can't forget that 2/2 becomes a 4/4. That's still in Mortar's range, and it's still in the range of a lot of Chris's removal, but he's going to take the chance.
Unflinching Courage is a really interesting card to board in this matchup. It's high risk, high reward. So the risk here is that Chris simply has a black kill spell, or even a Mizium Mortar since he put it on a 2/2. The reward is sometimes Chris's best way to stabilize is just by playing something like Pelucranos, and if Chris has kept a hand like that, Unflinching Courage will be worth its money in this matchup.
VanMeter, you see a mana confluence, so he does have access to black mana at this point. And that is a copy of Pelucranos, as you did mention. So the 5/5 shows up to the party.
Yeah, and this is pretty good. Scott can make the guy bigger with a Johnny. Granted, it's still not big enough to rumble through. But you see, look, a draw of Selesnya Charm here, and suddenly, like, Scott's not even, he's not even worried about the Pelucranos.
Yeah, he's able to make another attack there, get Pelucranos off of the table, play another land. Fortunately for VanMeter, there's no follow-up there,
now,
but he's doing pretty well.
Scott did miss a chance at an extra damage there. He probably wanted to swing to see if Chris would block, and then if Chris blocked, he would Selesnya Charm to pump, and then he would get to, well, I guess, no, then he only deals 1 damage instead of 5. I'm completely wrong. This is definitely the way to do it.
Top card going to go to the bottom there from the Temple. Here's a copy of Gore-Clan Rampager, but this isn't going to win in combat either here because Scott does have a Giant to give a +1/+1 counter if he wants to take that line. He also has the ability to just cast Advent of the Worm as well and maybe not attack at all. I'd be surprised if he takes that one because the Ajani play is so just pretty efficient and good.
I mean, and this is the strength of Unflinching Courage. Like I said, high risk, but the reward is if the way Chris is stabilizing is just by playing Elvish Mystic into Fat, well, making, in creature mirrors, the biggest creature often reigns supreme, and Scott, with the help of a Johnny and Unflinching Courage, is making Reed Duke token there the strongest creature on the battlefield.
It's pretty tough to out-fat the green-white deck. That's the thing.
I thought you were going to say Reed Duke in that situation.
No, not quite.
I was like, all right,
we're getting aggressive this morning?
Yeah.
No, not quite. It's tough to out-fat the green-white aggro deck. That's what this deck does very well. They play a creature, they play a bigger creature, they play the biggest creature, and hopefully it's good enough to get you dead.
I mean, this sounds like particularly obnoxious, right? Because not only is the biggest creature, but it has Vigilance, so it has Vigilance and Lifelink, so it just beats up the board. I mean, he has Chris down to 5.
And Metcalf's at 33. That's a lot.
Yeah. I'm not sure how relevant Metcalf's life total is in this matchup.
Well, I mean, the only thing here is, if Chris is able to stabilize like he did in the last game, I suppose it won't be relevant, but I don't know if every situation breaks that way.
Yeah, there are some racing spots, to be sure.
And we do have the result here that Peter Rep, with Mono Black Devotion, no splash necessary, does take down Jarvis Shu 2-1, and Peter Rep will be in the finals to play the winner of this matchup between VanMeter and Metcalf.
Peter Rep, the number 2 seed in the top 8, might have a 1 versus 2 finals. If Metcalf gets it, we also could have a 1 versus 2 finals in player ranking number 1 versus the number 2 seed here, depending on who wins.
The attacks there will take down the Ajani. VanMeter is going to pay 2. Let's make it 3 with Mana Confluence. And Rep is going to quickly untap and draw a card. I think he feels pretty good about his position here because that Boon Satyr.
Yeah, if he has the land, he can bestow Boon Satyr. That puts the creature up to 9 power. Sure, Stormward Dragon has protection from white, but that doesn't stop the white creature from trampling over for 5 more damage. With Chris at 3, that is enough to make it lethal, and we're on to game 3.
Yeah, headed to game 3 indeed. Scott Metcalf does win game number 2 here over Chris VanMeter. Green-white aggro, evening things up against Jund Monsters, and so we will have a 3rd and final one here, and it doesn't even look like either player is going to go back to the deck boxes. They are shuffling up pretty quickly here. Metcalf's draw as you mentioned, high risk, high reward with Unflinching Courage, but it definitely did pan out there as Unflinching Courage was able to just run him down quite well.
Unflinching Courage in this matchup. This is not where I would have expected him to bring it in, but it's doing a lot of good work.
Well, while we do wait here for these players to get ready for game number 3, we'll talk about Star City Games States. That is happening October 11th and 12th. Spring States was such a success that we're able to run one now in the autumn.
Yeah, so this is going to be October. In October, you have state championships. You can plant your flag and take home the title for your state. There's going to be one in each of the 50 states plus 2 U.S. territories. So you can find out more about that at starcitygames.com/states. These are the weekends of the Pro Tour. So while the pros are trying to break the new format, you can break it yourself and make a name for yourself at these tournaments.
Should be a lot of fun. First place does win a sweet play mat. That'll be black and white, actually, that image that's on the screen, and a medal as well. And oddly enough, in our match right now, as we do head back that way, we do have a state champion here in Chris VanMeter. He actually won West Virginia States in the spring. So he knows what it's like to go to Star City Games States and actually win that tournament. It actually helped him get more Open Series points to win Season 2 and qualify for the Players' Championship.
I always think that these state tournaments are really fun when they're on the same weekend as the PT, because PT start on Friday. So you'll see players like, right, I'm playing in a Saturday tournament, they'll watch Friday coverage and they'll immediately be like, oh man, that deck's sweet, I need to sleeve it up right now and try playing it in the next tournament. So
especially with the majority of the Pro Tours being standard now.
Right, so the Pro Tours, yeah, with the Pro Tour being standard, you're like, well, I wonder if I can play that. So you just get all sorts of wild decks at these tournaments, which is kind of why I always used to like, you know, back when States was a thing that happened every year, when it was always this big standard thing in the fall when the new set came out. I always liked just how, you know, you'd see crazy decks winning, and that was great.
States is easily one of my favorite tournaments. Not just Star City States, but, you know, when I was coming up and playing, you know, States was like the first big tournament that I went to. It felt like a really big deal to be playing at that tournament. I'm fortunate enough that I've won States twice over my career, and it just every time, I mean, from when I was young to when I was on, you know, playing on the Pro Tour, you know, States weekend was just something that I went and did no matter where I was at, you know, in playing Magic. You know, when I was the height of my powers or when I was very bad, I still loved going.
I mean, I still remember back in States, just like some of the better stories. Like, I remember there's a year where like a Missouri player won States, casting epic experiments for 7, getting temporal masteries. I remember a year, what is it? Reading a thread entitled "Everything's Bigger in Texas," where a player with Battle of Wits won Texas States.
Nice.
Which was excellent.
Very nice. That's an awesome headline. Elvish Mystic going to start things off here off of Stomping Ground. VanMeter is at 18. Metcalf with a Temple of Plenty, so no 1-drop here. Chris has got to be feeling pretty good about that. Not under the gun right away, and he has Man Accelerant on the play. We'll see what he has to do in the second turn of the game. It's just an Overgrown Tomb. That is a copy of Scavenging Ooze, and he will pass the turn back here. So a nice start here for Chris. Scavenging Ooze is actually a card that's quite good in this matchup.
It's like it's good at every point in the game, right? It's an early creature, and one of the things Chris has to do in this matchup is not fall too far behind on spell count. And later in the matchup, because Chris is now on the kill everything plan, this guy can actually go toe-to-toe with a lot of the bigger threats in the green-white aggro deck.
Call the Conclave on turn 2 there from Metcalf. Going to make a 3/3, so he's got the biggest creature on the battlefield. Again, that's likely to happen quite a bit when you're playing against green-white aggro. They've got the biggest creature more often than not. You can actually see in Metcalf's hand, he actually has a copy of Unflinching Courage at the ready, too. So he's able to make that Centaur larger next turn if he wants to. A Temple of Abandon there for VanMeter. Take a look at the top card. Consult the grip before moving forward. Looks like he has at least 1 copy of Missing Mortars, potentially 2. So that's going to stay on top. There is a Mortars to clear that up. And here's an attack for 3. Unfortunately for VanMeter, Call the Conclave is a spell, not a creature, so the ooze can't eat it.
And Chris has kind of stolen the aggro role from Metcalf right now. I don't think he can actually permanently take this role. Yeah, he's dealing 3 a turn, but Scott's going to become the attack deck pretty quick here.
There are definitely some cards that put the brakes on. You know, Chris does have the ability to put a draw together where, you know, he can keep attacking, and then, you know, Scott plays a Boonsater Putrefy, plays an Advent of the Worm, maybe Ultimate Price in, stuff like that. That draw, there's the potential for that, but I don't imagine that's the route that Chris is going to go. I think just on that turn, his plan was to kill the Centaur anyway, maybe for mana efficiency reasons. And so, you know, he's able to get in those 3 points of damage.
I mean, the big concern here, if you haven't had a chance to look at Scott Metcalf's hand, his hand is going a totally different direction this game.
Oh, it's a good hand.
So, yeah, he's taking 7 and going to 10. That's really scary. But, just running you guys out at home, Scott Metcalf's hand is Advent of the Worm, Unflinching courage, a Johnny Caller of the Pride. It's like almost like he's playing hexproof right about now. He's just going to build an unstoppable monster.
He's playing a different game. He plays Boonsetter on the end of turn. Now he plays a copy of Unflinching Courage and gets in for 6. He gets all that life back. He goes back up to 17. Now Chris draws a card. Now Chris has to have a removal spell.
Yeah, because it's only a toughness 4, it's eminently removable by a lot of Chris's cards, but he needs to have one this turn. Otherwise, this guy's taking to the skies, taking to Chris's life total. Bad things are going to happen if Chris doesn't kill this.
A copy of Golgari Sharp is very interesting. He's able to 2-for-1 there. Ooze can activate, take care of the Boonsatyr, get some life back, and now Chris can continue to press his advantage. It'll be an attack for 7. Let's make it 8.
And that should be good enough to take the racing from Scott Metcalf.
Yeah, it was a timely removal spell that he didn't need. Scott's draw this turn was a Call the Conclave.
I mean, Scott's going to be dead to a land because Chris can Monstrosity the Stormbreath Dragon. Scott's got plenty of cards in hand. There's a huge flyer.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best spot to be in, too, if you're Chris in this situation. My opponent, you know, basically anything I draw is good. If it's a land, I can activate the Monstrosity and Stormbreath Dragon. And if it's not, that means I drew a spell, and chances are the spell that I drew will be pretty good. Elvish Mystic is a little awkward.
That's what I was gonna, you said, well, if it's a land, it's good. If it's a spell, it's good. I was like, well, I think he drew the one card in his deck that does not fit into that dichotomy.
Yeah.
Like, this is, yeah, it's a spell, and it's probably the actual worst one to draw right now.
There are very few bad ones in his deck. And it's not even that Elvish Mystic is terrible, it's just not great. As VanMeter's going to come sideways here.
I mean, it doesn't, first of all, like, untapped land wins. So he missed that chance. And there's a little bit of a concern. There's some danger here, right? So Scott's going to go to a pretty low life total, but not to 0.
There's a Worm token deciding what to block now. And I imagine it will be the Ooze. There is no Rampager here for VanMeter. So away goes the Ooze. 5 damage comes across. Metcalf's going to go down to 3. Here's 2 creatures. And Chris is all in. He's saying, hey, if you can kill me this turn, well done.
So Scott needed to not play. He needed to block Elvish Mystic there, actually.
I mean, yes and no. Like, he doesn't know that Chris has, like, another mana source coming.
Right.
So I can't imagine that's the, a play that he's going to make.
Not that he was supposed to.
Sure.
That he needed to.
Sure.
You know, I think the way Scott played it is right.
And I mean, truth be told, I still think this is actually fine, right? Because he's at 3, so it's not even the situation where Monstrosity is something that Chris has to do, you know, because he just does have a lethal flyer.
Right. I mean, I don't know if Scott Metcalf can make it out of this turn. I think the answer is no. He can play Unflinching Courage and gain 8, but Chris will crack back for more than 11.
Yeah, I mean, he could win if Chris was at 10, because he has a Johnny in his hand, so it would be Xaxes, but he's 1 point short. And that's the problem.
Wow.
Again, Unflinching Courage would make the Worm into a 7/7. He would gain 7 life, and he would go up to 10. But that's just really not going to do it in this situation, unfortunately, for Scott.
What a timely Golgari Charm. The
Yeah.
one turn where Scott first went for the combo finish. Chris did have the kill spell. Wasn't the kill spell I would have expected him to have, but
It was good enough.
not the one you want, but the one you needed.
Here's the attack. Scott hoping that Chris will block in this situation, maybe make a bit of an error.
His only out is that Chris blocks with Blue Chronos, which is not a great out, but he is playing to his out.
Yeah, I mean, you have to play to your outs and hope your opponent makes a mistake in this situation. Chris says, I'm going to take the damage. You can deal me 7. I'll go to 4. Scott will gain 7. He'll go up to 10. All he can do is pass the turn back with a Manic Influence at the ready. Chris is going to draw his card.
As long as Chris turns everything sideways, he is on to the finals.
He's going to turn these 2 sideways so he can threaten the Monstrosity activation. There is that, and it's an extension of the hand. Chris VanMeter is going to win this match over Scott Metcalf. 2 games to 1. Jund Monsters takes down green-white aggro, and for Chris, he gets by green-white aggro not once, but twice, and now he's up against Mono Black Devotion in the finals.
Really impressive performance by VanMeter here. Once again, he is in the finals of one of these opens. This is not the first finals he has made in his quest for an open title and to shave the beard here, but to me, it's the most impressive one he's had so far, just based on the kind of matchups he's had to get through to get to this point.
And for those that know your history, the last open that Chris did win